Morning, Charlie.
Morning, Freddie.
How
That's
are you?
very well, thanks. Very good to see you again. It's obviously been a labour of love. This latest venture, this latest film, Scotland, hidden hidden sacred past, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, once the documentary before the book, it was an idea that it's just things that I've been building up for years, little bits of information. I think there's so little written on Scotland. I mean, you have to go to Ireland to look at what's happening in Scotland because they've kept more of the bardic tradition there. So if you want to look at who was available in Scotland to build this stuff, you have to go to Ireland first. Because back then it wasn't one or the other. It was just land and islands. They don't care about the naming of things. So you've got to treat the territory as one and the same. So it's just a matter of looking at, who put the temples there? Who put Caniche where it is? And, why is Orkney, the size of Orkney, even older when they should be younger? Because you're dealing with something that's so up at the far end of the world. And because of the Ice Age, they should have been developed later, but they developed sooner. So it's just a matter of looking at all my notes and things and then wandering off to Sardinia and going, oh, that's interesting. I saw that in Orkney. And then overlapping the two cultures. And then suddenly I thought, I think I've got enough here for like a documentary. But now I'm looking at possibly doing a book. I'm doing a bit of research and seeing if I can extend the information. But it is interesting.
yeah, very interesting. It's a beautiful production, Freddie. I mean, the content obviously is amazing. The way you've kind of brought everything together, but it's beautifully filmed. The soundscape is fantastic. It's really, you must be very proud of it, actually, aren't you?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, it's you see the thing with people our age is that when we went to college and we had no money and you had to do things in photography class and video class and you have no budget, you learn to use garbage to make it look really good. And half of the film that I'm working on it's just I'm sitting on a boat like this.
Yeah,
You can't really sit there with a gimbal because once you put a gimbal anywhere near these places, they'll charge you a professional fee.
of course.
And then your budget's basically wrecked. And you have no idea how much it took to take each one of those frames and make it look the way it does, flatten the movements, and then you've got to put these layers over Final Cut Pro, just like you would do in photography, in still photography, and then use shading here to improve the quality of the light when something is raining like hell and you're making it look like it's sunset. That was fun. It took a lot of effort. I mean, I think my computer was smoldering. I lost a video card because there's so much processing going on. Just to make 5 seconds of film takes like 2 hours. It's like, oh, this is excruciating.
Yeah.
But it's fun,
That
What
was
else are you
great.
going to do when you've got nowhere to go?
How many years have you been going to Scotland?
Oh, donkey's years. I think I've been going there since about 2002, somewhere around there. I can't get enough of it. I love that part of the world. I wish the Earth would tilt a few more degrees to make it, summer or winter a bit more compatible, balanced, because that moves there. Really, I love the islands.
I always remember somebody asking Michael Palin, who did these documentaries going around the world, and when he came back, they said, what's the most beautiful place in the world? He said, well, actually, it's just around the corner. The west coast of Scotland beats everything
Yeah,
else. That's
it's cool.
yeah.
And I didn't even realize that many of the names around there are actually Armenian. Isle of Aran, for example, that means the wooded valley between two hills. I thought that kind of describes Aran, actually. I'm looking at the etymology of Armenian throughout Scotland at the moment because there's a bigger story going on here.
Well, yes,
And
I wanted to ask you about that actually a little bit later. Do you mind if we? Do you mind if we do? Do you mind if we do a bit of island hopping? So to start off with Staffa, and introduce Fingal to us, who I think might play a part in the conversation that we're going to be having over the next half an hour or so.
absolutely.
So could you describe Fingal? I mean, describe Staffa first.
Well, he was a comely man, the big beard. Fingal actually appears in many legends around Ireland and Scotland. And the one that took my fancy was the one where he's actually the guardian of the other world, which I had no idea. And he's always followed by two black dogs. And I thought, wait a minute. I've heard this story somewhere else. I've heard this story in Peru. And I've heard this story in Tintagel's Cave, Merlin's Cave in Tintagel, and also in Greece. There's always a guardian of the soul when you enter these womb-like places. And he's like a tutelary god, but he's also a real person in many cases. The two overlap. Osiris being the classic example, he was a real person, and he's also a metaphoric example of a spiritual discipline. This is where archaeologists kind of get very confused. They think it's all mythical, but it's not. And Fingal was the same thing. He was described as a kind of a kindly giant, very, very tall guy. And he presides over this particular cave and a couple of others in the area as well. And they're always described as being places where you enter into the other world. And he has these two black dogs, and you always have this guy with two black dogs following him wherever you go. And the idea is that you need, the initiate needs the black dogs in order to see for him or her while his soul is entering into the darkness of the other world, because these dogs can obviously see better than we can. Yeah. And it's also the same thing in the tradition in Wales, in the Cŵn Anmun, they call the two dogs, and that's in a place called Cadair Idris, which is the chair of Enoch, the most holy mountain in Wales. So these things are all connected. And I put one and one together. And I thought, wait a minute, the places where you find this connection with a guardian of the other world in a sacred place, there's always a kind of association with Orion, wherever you go around the world. So I was looking at the caves one day from the boat. And it's kind of funny when you sit there trying to, look at through a camera, and there's a big shadow, and there's like a 15-foot wave next to this fishing boat, and you think, this is going to get close. And somehow the captain with one hand on the wheel just somehow navigates these enormous waves. It's not for the faint-hearted, Fingals Cave. And I noticed that there was actually 3 caves on the south coast of Staffa, not one. Fingals is the most obvious one, but there's 2 other ones as well. One dedicated to McKinnon, and then there's another one which I believe is just called Boat Cave. And I thought, I must get an Ordnance Survey map and look at this very, very closely. And I was looking at the caves, and they formed... 2 are in a line, they're very big, and there's a smaller one that's slightly offset. And I thought, now, if those were the belt stars of Orion, that would be a pretty good match. And suddenly you had this wonderful transfigurative moment, as you do at these places, where someone just feeds you this image of looking at the horizon. You're a figure standing at the bottom of Staffa, and I was, waves are coming right up to you. And I'm looking at the horizon, I'm imagining the belt of Orion coming over the horizon. I thought, I wonder if there's a connection. And I plugged the details into Stellarium and did the archaeoastronomy of the site. And sure enough, about 5000 BC, and the sea level would have been a lot lower back then, that Staffa would have been disconnected from Scotland by a small river. And you would be standing there in 5000 BC on the equinox and watching for the first time the belt stars of Orion lining up on the horizon relative to the actual caves. And that suddenly gave me the idea, okay, so the myth is actually true. We're talking about a place where people did used to go to do some kind of initiation, because it follows the same trajectory wherever you go around the world. So there was a wonderful moment of where connecting with the site talks back to you, and you follow the research, and it's there. So I can't tell you how many times this happens to me. So it's yeah, you know what you're looking for. You're just following this gut feeling, observing, and then something just this magical thing happens. This alchemy just happens where there's these images that appear in your head, and you go, "Well, okay." I guess it happens to musicians and artists all the time. And then you do the research, and sure enough, it's all there. And then that starts the trail. From there, you start making other connections, and you go to other sites, and you start putting together a story. It's like someone in the other world is trying to say, listen, there's a story here, and I want you to go and find it. And that pretty much defines most of my work.
And Fingal was, how was he described, basically?
Very tall, a giant, a kindly giant with a beard, which seems to follow the trajectory of kindly giants with beards. Sometimes they have red hair, which links them back to a divine bloodline around the world. In this case, we don't have no definition. That's pretty much it. And there's about 4 different stories of Fingal. There's variations. It's as though someone tells a story 1,000 years later. The story changes because of hearsay, and then by the time you get to 3,000 years later, they've completely changed the story altogether. So I like to go back to the original story, and the only one that I found that was that made complete sense without having been subjected to political bias, which it does tend to do over time. Kind of like the story of Enoch. It's the same thing. The story is 10,000 years old. By the time it gets into the Bible, it bears no resemblance to the original. So the original one was really just a kindly giant who was associated with all these places to do with initiation and a guide of souls into the other world. But not when you're dead, when you're still alive. That was a big difference.
Right, right. It is an extraordinary looking place, isn't it, Staffa? With those basalt kind of... Yeah,
it's unbelievable. It's also the second oldest rock on Earth. I don't know how they determined this, but it's pretty good to say that West Coast of Scotland has the second oldest rock on Earth, and specifically that location, and also on Mull, that whole area around there, and of course Iona as well. So that whole region around the West Coast of Scotland is very, very old. Has a lot of memory there, and to watch those, to stand and walk along those octagonal columns is quite astonishing. They have a handrail now so that tourists can hang onto the rail while the waves are coming in. Forget that. You could choose the grip because it's a bit slippery. And you just walk along, going around the waves, and it's the most wonderful experience. So I can imagine landing there when the sea level was lower on a boat and going in and doing your initiation and going on these columns. It must have been like entering this whole of sacred geometry, like you're connecting with something really fundamental before they went there and started to, saw the columns, because they used the columns for the buildings in London back in the Victorian era.
Oh,
so
really?
Yes. They said the whole thing looked like church organ pipes back in the day before they started cutting. What a job to go there in the middle of the Atlantic on a vertical cliff and sit there with a saw with waves being chucked at you, cutting these basalt columns to put on boats to be shipped off to the factory.
Yeah, amazing. And then we're on to Mull, and that incredible kind of it's Ben Buey, isn't it? The kind of red granite.
Oh yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about Mull? Can I just?
Oh, Mull is amazing. I love Mull.